you move the microphone relatively close to you, not some meters away. The pickup on them is notoriously quite poor, and it certainly does help on the recording and for anybody who's viewing online. The other thing this morning is we don't have any scheduled fire alarms or testing. So if you do hear one, it's real. And please treat it as real and evacuate the building via the nearest escape route. The nearest escape route is the stairs to your left as you leave the main council chamber or the public gallery, both of which will lead to the same staircase. Exit via the back door of the building, walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts can't be used in emergency. Please don't re-enter the building until you're told it's safe to do so. And if you could please make sure that your phones are silent, as I've done, but I will do it again just to demonstrate to people. All well and good. Right, thank you very much indeed. This is the meeting of the Isle of Wight Pension Fund Committee. It's Wednesday, the 6th of September, and it's now 10:01. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies and changes in membership. And we have apologies today from Councillor Claire Critcherson. And we've had a message from Councillor Karen Lucioni as well, that she may be coming in late, but I understand it won't be this side of, let's say, 11 o'clock or so. But we are quorate. There's still 5 of us here, which is very good. I don't think there are any other changes in membership. We can note that there were no changes in membership following the recent reallocation of seats, which I don't think has been formally announced yet, has it, or concluded? But there are no proposed changes in membership on that.
I believe that's being considered at the September committee meeting, September full council meeting. That's what I meant. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay. Item 2 on the agenda is the minutes of our last meeting on the 24th of May, which I've got here. They've all been circulated. And do we have any comments or observations or queries on the minutes? Paul, Councillor Brading.
I'd like to propose we accept the minutes, but I do wish to raise one item about matters arising, if I may.
All right.
So I propose the minutes.
Do I have somebody to second the minutes? Councillor Ward, thank you. All those who deem them to be a true and accurate record of what occurred on that occasion and would like me to sign them as such, please signify in the usual manner. Thank you very much. I shall now sign them. Interesting, Megan. We'll have the signing place on them. Yeah. The dotted lines have disappeared. Thank you very much. Right, we have a matter arising. Councillor Brading.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, under members' questions, I did ask a question, an oral question about eligibility for retired council employees to, well, why don't they enjoy staff benefits still? And I was promised an answer, and I've had absolutely nothing back since. So I'd like to know, please, since May, what's happened, and can I have an answer to my question, please? I've been asked again by another ex-council employee as to why they don't qualify for staff benefits. Thank you.
Has anybody got any information on that point? I guess otherwise we have to refer it through to the benefits group, don't we?
I don't have any information on that, Councillor Brading, but I would suggest this is not a matter for the Pension Fund Committee. It's a matter for the HR department. So I would suggest that you refer your question to Judy Mason as Strategic Lead for HR.
If I may just come back on that, Chairman, that was what the answer was given at the last meeting, but the offer was on behalf of the Pension Committee that they would be taken up on our behalf with the HR Committee. That was what was said at the last meeting, but just wondering what had happened since then.
All right, so on this occasion, I'll take the action personally and I'll raise it with Judy Mason and ask her to give us a response back and ensure you get that. Right, item 3 on the agenda then were declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay. Item 4 is public questions. We have nobody in the gallery. Did we receive any written questions? How surprise. We don't get many, do we? Right, so there are no public questions. Next one is the report from the local pension board. I shall turn immediately to my far right here and welcome you to the meeting,
Thank you, Chair.
Martin.
Due to the fact that the June local pension board was postponed and then the July pension board was cancelled due to key staff absence, we decided not to wait till September. We will have a board meeting next week, but we decided to have an interim informal board meeting, and that was in July. And the purpose was to check all from the administration and on the fund side, all the key processes were being carried out, and we were able to get reassurances from officers at that meeting that there were no causes for concern in terms of businesses as usual. Key targets were being met. Obviously, the summer has some particularly important targets because we have to get our annual statements out to all members by the 31st of August. So we were checking that everything's in line for that to happen. So in terms of business as usual, we have reassurances which we can pass on to the committee that even though the board didn't meet, we were happy that the business as usual was carrying on. And then we went on to have a discussion about the key risks to the fund. It particularly came to a head because there was a key officer that we all rely on for our board meetings and committee meetings absent at that time. So the board were very keen that and we'll discuss it, I'm sure, later in the, I see from the committee papers, in more detail later in the meeting. But in that meeting, the board was concerned about the single person risk that we feel is a constant danger, and that need for the staffing review commissioned by commissioned with Barnett Waddingham really needs to come to fruition, and decisions need to be made. We'll talk about that later, but one obvious concern is that at the moment the pension admin and pensions fund report to two different senior officers, and the Good Governance Project was all about bringing those under one senior officer, LGPS senior officer. And so we look as though we're either going to get bounced into complying with statutory guidance when it comes out on the Good Governance Project, or we adopt a position that we want. And we also talked to the meeting about the governance role support for on the governance side, and that will be addressed later in this meeting. But yes, real concerns about getting that staffing review over the line from the board. So that would be my message to the committee, if we could encourage committee as well to pursue the resolution on staffing resources, that key risk. So that would be my overview of the meeting we had.
Just following on from that, a quick update on board membership. The two employer representatives, which are fulfilled by the council, the councillor member and an officer, senior officer representative, are both vacant at the moment. I believe the councillor representative will be on the September the 20th full council meeting. for nomination following Councillor Lilly's departure from the board, and the CMT member replacing Ashley Curzon was discussed at two CMT meetings, and no resolution has been resolved yet. So I've had an email from Wendy Pereira seeking an alternative solution, which I'll need to follow up today. Just very quickly on a brief update on admin staffing. At the meeting that we had of the board, the informal meeting, we were confident that business as usual and training of trainees would continue as expected. Since that date, in total now, the pension admin team has lost 3 experienced officers since February, and they've been replaced by 3 trainees who are progressing incredibly well through their training and picking up business very, very quickly. The big issue that we've got is the 3 experienced officers who are gone are now not available to support the trainees, and the remaining officers are not struggling, but experiencing concerns about the capacity to continue to deliver BAU, business as usual, and deliver the training. So we are seeking support from Hymans Robertson for training services to agree to update on some of the more complex procedures, and also seeking temporary resources from the National LGPS framework to boost up the team to continue on a short term whilst we address internal recruitment and retention issues. Yeah. In terms of the structure report, there's been no progress on that since it was discussed by the Chief Executive and the Director of Finance in April. Although the recent staffing changes in the administration side have prompted some action on that side, so we're looking at making some good resources on there. And generally, due to capacity issues and officer, my own personal situations, I've not been able to update the risk register or the governance compliance statement since they were last presented to the committee meeting in May and the board in April. Just not had the time to do it. So we are continuing, we are pushing as hard as we can. You'll see from the agenda, we've had support from Hymans Robertson colleagues who are online to deliver the report for item 9A below. But it's a struggle at the moment. I had an email which we've accepted, which is the way that we've accepted previous resignations that way before. Yes, that's how we've normally communicated, because that the board is not a formal committee of the council, it's a separate organisation, so we have slightly different administration arrangements for it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of retention, isn't sort of the basic issue that the Isle of Wight Council doesn't pay enough for this level of staff because they can earn much more in London but still live on the Isle of Wight? And isn't that the kind of question that we really need to start addressing if we've lost 3 people for similar reasons? I mean, people aren't leaving because they're unhappy, they're going to similar jobs elsewhere. And it's an unfortunate reality that people can live on the Isle of Wight and work in various places across the country at higher rates. So I would have thought the question basically is looking at the job description and the pay rates.
In response, if I may, this is what's being done at the moment with the administration team in particular, as part of our retention package and an agreement with HR that the admin team will be reviewed and fully restructured over the next 12 months. That covers the administration side.
Councillor Brading.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly and most importantly, it's good to see Jo back. I know she's, I imagine the work has piled up in your absence, but it's really good to see you back at County Hall, doing what you're good at. So good to see that. Thank you much and for your report. I think it's important that you did meet and have the report. It's interesting, and I read down on my fault, Councillor Lilly, because you only had 4 people at your meeting, which was 4. I know you had 1 absentee, but without Councillor Lilly and without Ashley's replacement, it leaves you short of numbers for a really important role. And I think the way Councillor Lilly just immediately dropped everything, I think it should have been, I'll stay on until a replacement is found, knowing the importance of the board. I mean, Reg did it for years, and he was criticised for a lot for what Reg did, but he was a regular member of the committee. And when you're not going to find someone to take Ashley's place, also is disappointing. And I know Joe's going to meet with Wendy about that later. But the board, and certainly you raised one of your risks you raised that was staffing. The next comment, obviously, losing 3 experienced staff has brought that risk to the forefront quite quickly. Yes, the trainees will be good, but someone's got to train the trainees, and it's that thinking ahead, isn't it? If you had experienced staff that were at risk, get a trainee in earlier, get them trained, ready to take over when someone does leave. Because it was a case of, Joe was off, then 3 experienced staff go. There's a lot of pressure on the rest of the team because they've got to train the trainees. Yes, it's time well spent, but it's the short-term risk that Martin's picked up in his report that is the almost bit us in the bum here, big time. I hate that expression, but it did cause a severe short-term problem, probably a 6-month problem while the trainees get up to speed. So thank you for all that you're doing, and I hope we get the board membership back up to correct levels. It's good that Councillor Andre mentioned that will be addressed. Board membership is important. So, but welcome back, Joe.
Councillor Andre.
I think most of what I was about to say, that's the only drum we're going second. But just to echo, really, just to say, we do appreciate the pressure that the team is under. You alluded earlier, Joe, to certain issues being HR issues, and obviously they are working very closely as part of the restructure. Steve, you highlighted what you highlighted in terms of equity of pay is not just an issue within the pensions admin team. It goes right across the board. So I think my question is, and I think you've really already answered it, is that it's good that you're having conversations with the chief executive, but just to make sure that it is being dissipated down to HR, because obviously it's very much an HR. And just a little bit perhaps of reassurance. I know that at the moment, it's fair to say, I think, that we are in a little bit of a state of flux, but just to reassure you, there is a plan in place that we hope to enact by the beginning of next month. So we should have at least a defined structure. So in terms of the membership of the board, that should hopefully facilitate that and actually give a bit more clarity. But just to make sure that HR are very much aware, which I'm sure they are.
Right, thank you. Any other questions? No. Well, thank Martin very much for his report and for his verbal update, and Jo for her additions as well. Right, so moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the annual report and accounts.
Thank you. This will be a very quick update. I suspect you can probably guess what the answers will be. In terms of the 21-22 accounts, the draft pension fund annual report for the year ended March 22 has been published, subject to external audit. The external audit is for the council is still ongoing and is progressing, and work continues. We are not sure what the final position is, but we believe it will be resolved for the 25th of September audit committee. So once the council's accounts for 21-22 are signed off, then we can publish the final 21-22 pension fund annual report. For 22-23, in your pack, you've got an extract of the draft financial results for the Isle of Wight Pension Fund for the year ended March 23. Those pension fund accounts are currently published with the Isle of Wight Council's draft accounts, for the year ended March 23. They were published on the council's website for the inspection period from the 23rd of August to the 4th of October. Given the non-completion to date of the 22 audit, we do not have any indication yet when the March 23 external audit for the council and the pension fund will start. The statutory deadline for the publication of the pension fund's annual report for the year ended March 23 is the 1st of December 23. So the intention is to bring the annual report in draft to the November Pension Fund Committee meeting and then publish it in draft and unaudited on the pension fund's website by the 1st of December or as soon as practicable thereafter, so that we can comply with that statutory deadline. That's about all I've got to say, unless anybody's got any questions on the annual report and accounts papers.
Councillor Andre.
Thank you. And I may be completely going down a rabbit hole here. I know we've only had an extract at Appendix 1, but is the our contribution to access, or does that not appear within this?
The costs of our contribution to access are hidden within investment management fees.
It's included in that.
General management expenses, yeah.
Okay.
There is more detail available. We can provide more detailed information, and the full pension fund accounts run to about 40 pages, I think. They are available on the council's website as part of the council's draft account. So if you did want to look in more detail, we would be very happy to provide more information if members are interested, but we didn't. The meeting pack was significantly chunky anyway. We didn't want to add too much.
It is included in that figure.
Yeah, it is.
Councillor Churchman.
Sorry, I see that the active members has gone up. Do you expect that to increase, Joe? And the reason I ask is because there's been quite a big article in the Times about pensions, and the chief exec of Aberdeen has said, I know that doesn't apply to councils, but has stated categorically that people need to double their pension contributions. Is that like a warning shot to us as well, that maybe more people on the council, it's not, we wouldn't increase our charges, etc. But do you think that sort of thing might increase our membership, our pension membership? I mean, it's gone up, what, 36? I know that's not a lot, but I just wonder whether people might take note of the rest of the world, if you, as I put it.
Councillor Churchman, that's a good question. All of our staff who are eligible for membership are automatically enrolled in the pension fund when they join employment with the council. So there is a requirement for us to automatically contractually enroll them, and then it is the member's decision to opt out or not. We cannot force a member to be in a pension fund, but we do strongly encourage them by automatically enrolling them to ensure that they have that option. Members can opt out at any time, but there is an automatic re-enrollment process for each of the employers every 3 years. I think ours was 2 years ago. So in the next 12, 18 months, we will be carrying out, and the council as employer will be carrying out another automatic enrolment activity to ensure that everybody that opted out is back in and then has the option to opt out again. So we follow national regulations, national guidelines on doing that. In terms of offering it out to other people, we're not entitled to offer our pension scheme out to any other body unless they are outsourced or an academy, new free school, for example. So our membership potential is a restricted pool, but we do encourage as many of them to enrol as possible.
And the total between 22 and 23 end of March went up. I think it was in 6B by 378. So quite a significant increase. All right. Anything else? Any other questions to Joe or anyone on that section? No? Okay.
The item 9 up to the next item on the agenda, because we've got Susan and Andrew online. That would be helpful if we could do that.
Okay. Is everybody happy that we move item 9 up on the agenda? We've got two remote guests here who are dealing with those items, and it'd be good if we deal with them rather than keeping them hanging on indefinitely. Good. So we'll jump then to item 9, and we hand over here, Joe, I presume, to Susan and Andrew, who. Oh,
Andrew on that screen and
Yep.
Susan on that screen.
very good, clever. Good.
I may buck the train because I'll put some slides up and that might obliterate either Andrew or myself. Hi everybody, my name is Susan Mackenzie. I work for Hyman Robertson. Introduce my colleague Andrew McKearns, who's a governance consultant. I'm a project manager, and we both facilitated the session that resulted in this the report that you've seen as part of the papers, and this piece of work that we're going to just narrate through for the next 10 minutes or so. So if you'll bear with me, I will just share my screen.
For members' information, I have a copy of these slides. I will circulate them after the meeting.
Do you want me to? Is it okay if I share the screen? Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's fine. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we didn't lose either of you.
Oh, good. I can't see anybody now, so apologies for that. So the purpose of the pack is just to help us navigate through the report. There's no new information on these slides at all, but I say they're just to help us navigate our way through, just so that we kind of cover all the salient points. So this is part of the update for the governance outlook report, as we've kind of said. So you should have seen that in the papers. Just to kind of cover off with a bit of a background and the approach that we took. I think it's fair to say that the regulatory landscape for pension funds is ever more demanding. It's an already stretched resource and makes compliance ever more complex. I think Isle of Wight, being one of the smaller funds in England and Wales, feels that impact of those kind of increased demands more keenly than some of the larger funds who are possibly able to absorb some of that impact, which is the unfortunate situation we find ourselves in. I think as we joined the call a little bit earlier, as we kind of some of the discussions, and we know that on the risk register that some of the resourcing and capacity issues have already been kind of quite keenly felt over the past little while. And that's really what brought us to the workshop on the 9th of August, just to dig a little bit deeper on those challenges and work through some of the options that we have to try and address some of those challenges. So at the end of this section, what we're asking the pension committee to do is to note the report that we've issued out, agree the working assumptions that we'll chat through, agree and support some of the quick wins we've managed to identify, and then we've got some next steps that we'd like to have approved as well. Okay. So just moving on to the kind of some of the key findings. Just to kind of recap, the pre-work that we did with the fund was to kind of pull together some of the current governance ask on the fund. So what the fund has to do, a big list of things to do, what the status of those items were. I think again, kind of Joe alluded to some of the items are maybe kind of not as current as we would like them to be. And keen to focus initially on the first kind of in the year, so the first kind of next 12 months in more detail, because there's probably a bit more certainty there, and then not to lose sight of the next kind of couple of years, because as I'm sure everybody knows that it all kind of comes all too quickly. There's probably a bit less certainty about what's happening over the kind of 24 to 26 period, but certainly over the next 12 months we've got much more clarity on what we need to do. We started off with 120 items. They were our inputs. They came from some of the activities. So we as the kind of fund advisor kind of worked through some of the things that we know that fund have to comply with. That was supplemented by the fund officers. And then there was also the kind of the documents and policies. There was a kind of a status update for each of those items with the next date or the overdue review date in there. They were over 12 key areas, so things like actuarial, data, admin. I see they're all kind of in the report, but quite a hefty number of areas in there. And over the course of that workshop day on the 9th of August, we whittled those down to 80 items, and then we prioritised those in order. Where we came to was there was about a third were high priority items, and we kind of categorised them as the must-dos for the fund to remain compliant, and they were tended to be over the next 12 months. We then had some medium priorities, which was about 40% in there. We kind of classified them as more kind of should do, or there was more of a kind of a less urgency in the next kind of 12 months. That was the kind of loose definition we agreed there. And then we had some low priority items, and then where we kind of said that we don't actually know, so future requirements of where we don't actually know what the ask is currently, because some of the regulations have just got a kind of outline of them, and then some items where they were actually on hold, so we consciously decided to put them on hold. So they were kind of the next kind of third of the items that we had were low priority. What was also quite keen to do was to get a visual representation, because we can use lots of words, but actually, as you'll have seen in your pack, I know it's very small and very busy, but actually just trying to look on a, we call it a plan on a page, just so you've got like a helicopter view of what has to be done, and it's kind of a bit easier to kind of see where the high, medium and low priorities are. During that kind of prioritisation, as I say, it was quite important for us to kind of think about where the low priority items are, that we're consciously deciding not to do these things, or certainly not to have a focus of them over the next year. So again, that's kind of a consciousness of decision making rather than it being non-conscious because you don't get round to it. And the high priority items, again, having a bit of a deeper dive there to think about, well, how are we going to do these things and where do we need to seek help for the fund, as I say, just kind of given the kind of resourcing conversations that we had earlier. Where there's probably a little bit more work to do on the medium priority is we probably need to just have another kind of pass at those ones, just to kind of things change again, and maybe the time horizon might change over the next period of time, but they are the kind of ones to watch because they could either quickly come to high priority or drop down to low priority. So those are the ones that we want to kind of keep more of an eye on. So that was kind of our key findings from a prioritisation perspective. During that kind of session, we also kind of happened upon some quick wins. That might be a bit of a misnomer, but some of the quick wins we thought we could kind of get a few things ticked off reasonably quickly, just to try and kind of give ourselves a bit of a sense of achievement quite early on. Data improvement plan being one of them, where there's lots and lots of good work, as I'm sure you see lots of positive things coming through on data, lots of good things that the fund does, but again, just to kind of be able to evidence that, so that's really kind of corralling all the good stuff that's being done and putting that together in a plan. So that was one of the activities that we were looking at to do over the next year and just accelerate that. One of the other ones was a conflict of interest policy, where there's a reliance on the Isle of Wight Council constitution, and there's a template that Hyman's have that maybe a kind of quick fix, just to get something there that's more fund specific, and tick a box there. And then finally on the quick wins for now, the kind of system project to kind of for immediate payments, again, just on the challenges and the admin staff, looking to kind of take something that's quite heavy on resource and try and kind of automate that to a high degree, and then give those kind of staff more value add tasks. So just kind of thinking about how we're using staff more wisely. On the other side of that, there were some pinch points we had identified, and again, it'll probably come as no great surprise. We've also got Jo as the governance in the key role, but there's nobody to delegate to for Jo, and we know that there's a governance officer vacancy, which, despite a national advert, haven't managed to entice anybody to take up that role. And there were some things during that workshop that we identified that could kind of relatively easily pass on to the governance officer, and again, just freeing up Jo to kind of go and do the other things that are more on her to-do list. So that was quite a good kind of sense check that there are kind of plenty of things that the governance officer could be getting on with. So that was kind of where we had our kind of the kind of second part of the key findings, just thinking about what could we do kind of to maybe kind of accelerate the outputs of the review. Moving on to working assumptions, and again, the reason why we kind of thought about working assumptions was that we may not have all the certainty that we want at the present moment in time, but really to be able to build a kind of reasonably solid plan to address some of the findings that we've got on the report, we probably need to make some reasonable assumptions so that we can plan a kind of stable way forward. These kind of fell into two categories, the first one being related to the fund, and the two assumptions we made in there was that the fund continues to function in the long term and that we have a fully trained and resourced team. So again, just kind of making sure that we're committed to that's the focus of the fund at the present moment in time. And then secondly, that the highest priority tasks across the fund would be the kind of from a business as usual and being very clear about what those things were. One in the administration function, being that we pay the pensioners and dependents the right amount at the right time, which is the kind of absolute reason for the fund existing. And in the finance and accounting side of things, that we maintain cash flows and the day-to-day accounting. So if we do nothing else, we need to make sure that that happens. From a governance perspective, that the kind of the cycle of the pension committee and the board meetings continue, and that's the kind of the usual cycle of meetings. And then what we also kind of found is that the high priority items that we've identified here, the 27 items we talked about before, that they are again the most high priority tasks that we've got. So we kind of left the workshop thinking that they were a reasonable set of working assumptions to be able to plan the next steps going forward. Moving on finally to the next steps, again, probably just kind of going over what we've kind of talked about through the pack. First one being where we have got those 27 high priority activities. It's probably a bit of an ask for the current resource to deliver BAU and those high priority actions. So we've got a plan to look to see how we can support those. Can we outsource them? Can we kind of be creative and imaginative in how we deliver them? So that's the kind of next step for the high priority items. As we kind of talked before, the medium priority activities probably just need to do a little bit of a deeper dive. Has anything changed that makes them kind of higher priority, or do they kind of fall into the low priority? Because again, they'll be next items to be thinking about, well, how can we deliver those medium priorities? Because they say they may be kind of 1 or 2 years out, but they'll soon kind of come knocking at our door. And then the kind of finally, just to make sure that the low priorities have stayed low priorities, just do a quick validation of those low priority items in there as well. And then I say we get some quick win traction just to make sure that we've got we're galvanised some action so that we can actually deliver some elements on the back of the workshop. Finally, one of the other kind of items we felt was important was to kind of seek some clear direction. And it was kind of discussed at one of the earlier points of the meeting, a decision on the structural options paper. Again, that was we've made an assumption that we are kind of planning for the long-term nature of the fund and fully resourced fund. That's the assumption that we're making, but it would be good to get that clear direction, because I suppose regardless of the way the decision goes, there will be an impact assessment required to say, well, what do we need to make sure that that options paper can be delivered. Again, having kind of worked really hard with the fund and having kind of spent some time with Matthew, Joe and Joe, the initial focus of getting everything down on paper, being able to kind of sift through it for high, medium and low, we need to make sure we maintain focus on that delivery. So we'll probably start to we'll call it RAG rating. So red, amber, green, is it on track, is it at risk? So we'll probably just start to kind of keep focus on that delivery by that way. And then kind of keep reporting back into the Pension Fund Committee just on our progress, so that you've got kind of the visibility that the fund have on how we're tracking to the plan that we're setting ourselves. That's everything I was going to cover off. I will stop sharing my screen if I can manage. I realise I had spoken through that quite quickly. Any questions or comments?
Councillor Churchman.
Sure you can hear me. Right. Because we are such a small fund, in fact the smallest, is there any compensation regarding the rules and regulations, or are we subject to every single piece of statutory guidance, regulation, etc., as funds which could be 4 times our size?
Andrew, can I pass that one to you?
Yeah, that's good morning, Councillor Churchman. No, sadly, that's in terms of compensation. No, the requirements of local government pension scheme are absolutely applicable to the Isle of Wight Pension Fund. I suppose the difference that you would see is it would have kind of lower numbers than those larger funds, but all of those requirements, those governance requirements that come from the pension regulator, the expectations set by Scheme Advisory Board, the decisions and the direction from the Department Levelling Up Housing and Communities, all of that is applicable to Isle of Wight. So What I would say, and again, it's conversations that I've had with Joe, is that this has been a real big change for local government pension funds, really since that kind of introduction to the pension regulator, those requirements coming on board. So the timing of that structural paper, I'd agree. You know, I'm sure the officers would want to have that as quick as possible. But the timing of that is really important, because what you're doing is assessing what is required for the fund right now and going forward. I would say that there is that exposure just now, given those requirements. You know, given the reporting that's required now from pension funds, in comparison to say even 5 years ago. So sadly, there's no compensation. You as a committee have to, you know, assess the landscape, your requirements, and then, you know, instruct or certainly delegate to the fund officers to make sure you deliver on those requirements.
Supplementary, please, Chair. Has joining a pool access made it better for us? I know perhaps we get into funds which we couldn't get into before. I understand that. But looking at the amount of work involved for our officers, and the fact that we probably pay you a lot more money than we ever did before, I suspect, because of the extra work. So has pooling benefited us actually in the long term?
I mean, Joe, I can happy to do the first part of this if you want, or you want to do your comments on that question.
We'll let you carry on talking, Andrew, and then we'll pass over to David,
Pass it
I
back.
think.
I think one of the interesting parts about pooling, I mean, again, this is David's probably going to come into because he'll know it far more than myself. If we're talking about administration and governance and that expectation that there is a universal standard set by LGPS funds, that's kind of what DLUC are expecting for them. So the pool is obviously allowed Joe, I'm speaking on behalf of her, to have lots of conversations and lots of discussions with funds, and can pick up, you know, okay, what is this fund doing? You know, what standards are they setting? Again, it's about expectations, because all the funds they're not doing things the exact same way. They're all slightly different. They all have slightly different decisions that they are making. And I mean that both within service delivery, the administration side of things, and on the governance requirements as well, and are at different stages. So pooling in terms of governance and administration has allowed you to get access to, I would say, further conversations with those kind of like-minded funds, or certainly the funds to pool. Saving money, I think it's quite hard to see that just now because the requirements have stepped up. So for yourself as a committee, you would look and say, okay, what was the structure we had at the beginning of all this? You know, so the introduction of that care pension scheme, local pension boards, and then you have the pension regulator coming in 2016. How have you adjusted since that time? So if there hasn't been too much adjustment, then you would naturally expect that because the requirement has increased, you may have had to seek that additional support. So you're kind of right at that decision, I would say, just now, as to what you do in order to deliver the requirements of a pension fund.
David.
I suppose just to flag in terms of the work plan and an example of where I'm hoping the pool will start to make things easier. Or, you know, we've got a couple items later on the agenda today about the current consultation. Clearly, there was a previous consultation on TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Again, additional governance and reporting requirements. So my hope is that the access pool will be able to play a greater role in providing the information that you need. And you know, when Susan had that diagram of where you can get support from officers, my hope is that the access pool, the support unit, will do a lot of the heavy lifting for you and make some aspects of that easier. So not to say giving a strong view on whether pooling has been successful or not, but I think certainly the pool should allow you to have that additional resource to help the officers on some of the governance and reporting requirements that you'll have.
Thank you, David. I think Joe had something to add.
Sorry, just to reiterate, Councillor Churchman, that the access pool is focused on investments, not on governance. So there are governance arrangements within the access pool around the governance and the investment strategy and the delivery of those managers. But in terms of policies and, you know, paying benefits and making sure that we've got the right structure and we've got the right information coming to the pension board and to the pension committee, that's completely outside of access. So as both David and Andrew have said, I have access to a support network in terms of other heads of pension fund for the access fund, so I can share best practice, share woes, share experiences. But in terms of the delivery of the governance, the pooling has added an extra layer of work in terms of making sure that access is appropriately governed whilst managing our investments on our behalf. But in terms of the work that we have to do locally, it's a knowledge pool, but it doesn't actually make any impact on delivering the services, other than, as David said, you know, the expectation that pool-wide reporting on climate change and task force for climate related financial disclosures and other ESG responsible investment activities will be delivered and reported on to us, for us, by the pool. Access is just adding another layer of burden onto the workload of the people that we've already got.
All right. Any other questions? If not, I'll suggest we move the 4 recommendations which are on page 85, items 4 to 7. And I look for a seconder for those. Councillor Andre, thank you very much. Is everybody in favour of those? Councillor Churchman, yep, good. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much indeed.
So can I just to add the next steps on this report in its entirety will be going to the pension board on the 13th of September. The discussions and the points noted from today's meeting will feed into the board's discussion. I will have another conversation with Andrew and Susan after today's meeting and work out where we go from now. But the key actions that we're looking for and the support that we're looking for are really just, I don't really know, from senior officers within the council who are responsible for the pension fund to support the activity that we're doing. I've had a quick conversation with Chris Ward as Director of Finance, and he is comfortable with allocating cash resource to resolve some of these issues as much as we can. So we'll just have to report back to you as matters progress.
Thank you, Joe. Just to the work plan, I don't know what we need to do with the work plan, which is 9B.
The work plan 9B was an indicative allocation of work over the next 24 months for the pension fund committee. This was, and there's a similar plan for the board. This was prepared before the work that was done, or sort of outside of the work that was done with Hyman. So that plan will be changing. Some of the priorities may move, but really to indicate to the committee and board that this is the cycle of work that we will be presenting to you over the next 24 months. It is a lot. There will be a lot of papers. There will be a lot of decisions. I'm sorry, but that is just the way that it is. So please, if you are on the committee, and I do value your input and your commitment, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have any thoughts or any suggestions, please do let me know at any time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So we'll simply note that and note your additional comments about the status of it, but also to point out the continuation of the single point of failure in terms of responsibility, which has your name on it, Joe, in a remarkable large number of that column. Right. No. So well, thank very much indeed to Andrew and Susan for their input on this. Andrew's disappeared from the screen now. And glad that we were able to bring that forward on the agenda to assist. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. We'll go back now to item 7 on the agenda, 23 in the pack, which is the recording and reporting breaches on law policy.
Thank you. This is me. I was intending to do a quick briefing session as a similar training session that I delivered to the pension board when they considered this. But circumstances meant that I haven't prepared anything. So I apologise for that. So the reporting breaches of the law policy as it sets out in the paper is we have a policy. It was overdue for review, so it fell into our schedule of review. And a lot of the people that were named in the policy as being reported and reporters are no longer with the council as an organisation. So we needed to update it and we needed to review it to make sure that it was fully compliant with the changes that were coming through on the forthcoming pension regulators single code, general code, something, whatever it is, a combined code of the 15 codes of practice that it currently has. So in the appendix to this report, you've got the draft policy, which has been reviewed by the pension board and considered appropriate and is recommended for your adoption. And you've also got the extract from the pension regulators draft code of practice on whistleblowing and reporting breaches of the law. In the background papers, I've linked to some public sector toolkit modules that will enable you to get a brief understanding of reporting breaches of the law, and also the extra resource that's available from the pension regulators website, setting out example breaches and a traffic light framework for red, amber and green, and the way that those types of risk need to be recorded and or reported to the pensions regulator. The policy, as I say, has been considered and is deemed fit for purpose by the board. The next steps would be to circulate the policy. Should you agree to adopt this this policy, it will be published on the fund's website and will be circulated to parties in the policy who are identified with responsibility for reporting breaches. So that's councillors, that's officers and staff of the council and the fund, that's employers, it's advisors and probably other people as well, so that they are aware of their responsibilities for identifying and reporting breaches, and maintaining a breaches log, which would be the first point of contact for reporting breaches is myself, or if I am involved in the potential breach or suspected of being involved in the potential breach, it goes to the monitoring officer, Chris Potter. And the breaches log will be to record all identified potential breaches, whether or not they are reported to the pensions regulator, and to record the assessment of why they are reported or not. And the proposal is that that's presented to the board meeting for their monitoring and review, and will be reported to the committee as part of the board's report to each committee meeting. So the options, the recommendations on page 23 of your pack are as they stand.
I think we should thank Joe here for a stupendous piece of work, but see if there are any questions from anyone. Steve.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, I wasn't quite clear on who has the duty to report. That's on page 56. It wasn't very clear to me that it was employees and pension committee members as well.
Everybody.
Well, it just wasn't very explicit.
56. So in the policy itself, Steve, in the policy itself, let me just find the right page. Bear with me. On page 36, reporters are required. So on page 35, sorry, reporters are defined as all members of the pension fund committee and local pension board, all officers involved in the management or administration of the fund, including officers in the finance services and pension services teams, professional advisors, including investment advisors, auditors, actuaries, legal advisors, etc., all participating employers in the scheme, and any other person involved in advising the managers of the scheme. So it is pretty conclusive that it is anybody.
Yeah, very comprehensive. Yes.
Page, yeah.
So if there are no other questions, I'll move from the chair then those recommendations 4, 5 and 6 on page 23. And look for a seconder, Councillor Brading. Everybody in favour of that? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and a big thank you again to Joe. Right, item 8 on the agenda. We're going straight over to David.
Sorry, David.
Yep, no problem. So within the pack, I think under 8B is the kind of quarterly investment performance report up to the period to end of June of this year. So I'll just draw out some kind of key highlights and then happy to take any comments or questions. So the first couple of slides provide a bit of background on market movements over the most recent period. I think the headlines were that I suppose growth was proving more resilient than many had expected, but at the same time, persistent high inflation, although there's some signs of it coming down, kind of core inflation was still higher than expected, I think, with kind of wage pressures in particular coming through. Along with the higher inflation, we saw further interest rate rises, which you'll have seen, but that feeds through into the bond market returns that you'll see as well. So a bit of a divergence in the returns that you'll see on the assets. So equity markets generally holding up okay over the most recent quarter, strong over the last 12 months, whereas the bond assets, significant negative returns over the quarter, and in particular over the last 12 months, when it includes that initial period of interest rate rises, the mini budget from last year, and then feeding through into this year. So quite a divergence in the asset returns, and that's reflected in some of the relative asset allocation positions that I'll touch on as well. The other point in terms of the market background on the page 69 was in terms of the sector returns within equities. And again, this will feed through into some of the relative manager performance. You may have heard a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence, feeding through into using technology stocks. So quite a stark difference when you actually see, although equity market performance was okay overall for the quarter, a lot of that was driven by the technology sector and this increased focus on AI. So again, quite a divergence there, and that will be reflected in some of the relative performance of the managers as well. In terms of the outlook, I suppose with bond yields having gone up so much, we are starting to be a bit more positive on the outlook for bonds and potential for you to do some rebalancing back into the bonds at some point. So real yields of around about 1% are more attractive, certainly were when they were -2 or -3 for many years over the last decade. So more attractive looking at bonds, although clearly a bit of a kind of difficult period over the last 12 months as those rises in yields have come through. In terms of the asset allocation on page 71, you'll know that partly due to those relative movements that the growth allocation remains overweight by a reasonable margin and protection underweight. And again, that's something that might be potentially discussed post some of the decisions today about particularly the kind of long-term future of that protection allocation in terms of the access options. We've also got other items on the agenda looking at the targets here are the current targets, but you'll remember we've proposed to increase the targets to some of the asset classes as well. So again, we'll look to address some of those relative positions over time once decisions are made around those asset classes. In terms of the fund performance, again, slightly mixed performance across the managers, strong performance from your equity managers in general, with BlackRock and Newton both substantially ahead of benchmark over the quarter and the last 12 months. The Baillie Gifford Diversified Growth Fund, which has a mix of equities, bonds, and diversifying asset class, and is measured against a cash plus benchmark, given cash rates have been rising, and they have a mix that includes bonds, which have been quite hard hit by the recent rate rises. So they've struggled to keep up with that kind of cash plus benchmark. And again, part of the strategic review was looking at reducing that allocation in due course. The other kind of slight problem child at the moment in the asset allocation is the Schroders Property Fund. Although the property market is starting to stabilise a little bit, they've been underperforming recently, partly due to an overweight allocation to the office sector, which is still going through, the kind of structural reforms post-COVID, new ways of working, and that's causing a little bit of a drag in their performance. And then finally, in the Schroders, the fixed income allocation, some negative performance coming through against in terms of their relative position, kind of overweight to some of the fixed income or the government bond asset classes that were hard hit by the continued rise in rates and bond yields. In terms of the manager ratings, one thing to note that's not on here, I think just following the publication of the report, we did get some news about some personnel changes at Newton. So again, they're already on suitable rating. We're still evaluating the impact of those changes, and we'll come back to you once we have a kind of firmer view on the impact of those. But the kind of lead portfolio manager stepping away. So again, we'll follow up on that in due course. In terms of the other kind of key highlights, the BlackRock UK equity since your inception has been doing well. So looks like a good, in terms of your timing of the move into that strategy, it's been very, very positive in terms of relative performance. In Newton, although we're looking at the personnel changes, performance has been holding up well and is very strong over the recent period. The other ones that I haven't touched on, just to highlight, are probably in terms of some of the more illiquid asset classes. Just to note on the Goldman Sachs, your private debt allocation, good progress in terms of getting the money invested and being drawn down with that mandate. And again, we've got items later on the agenda looking to consider potential the process for considering further commitments to that asset class. Partners Group, I think, coming in, so maybe not touch too much on them, but again, still earlier stages in terms of them drawing down money, investing in that asset class. So those were the kind of key highlights, and happy to take any comments or questions on the report.
I think we'll probably have more questions later on in the meeting on this one. Let's maybe get into a bit more of the detail. Has anybody got any questions at this stage they'd like to raise on what's been discussed now? All right, then I think we'll thank you for the update, David. Does that include everything we need to cover on the QPMR, the QIPR as well?
Yes.
Just looking through that quickly. So, yep. All right. So we're now on to item 10 on the agenda, which is members' question time. Your golden opportunity, folks. And there are none. Right. All right. So moving on from that, item 11 on the agenda then is the exclusion of the press and public. I'll read it out. To consider passing a resolution that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business, namely agenda items 12 to 15, on the grounds that there is likely to be a disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'll propose that. Councillor Andre seconded. Everybody in agreement? Thank you.